The government is still expected to cut billions from the welfare budget. This comes after the Prime Minister said the current system was the worst of all worlds, discouraging people from working while producing a spiralling bill. So today we're asking, has the benefit system put people off work? To discuss that, I'm joined by Jean-André Prager, Senior Fellow at Policy Exchange, Alia Butt, a psychotherapist and author, James Taylor from the charity Scope, and joining us from Manchester is journalist and commentator Angela Epstein. Good to see you all. Jean-André, so it looks like the government could perform a U-turn on plans to freeze the personal independence payments, but restrictions on who qualifies for PIP are still likely. Is this a case of punishing the most vulnerable in society, would you say?
Well, I welcome, I think, what's been reported overnight about the decision possibly not to go ahead with the freeze. I think it's a very crude measure and it's very indiscriminatory. I think more broadly, there's a major problem in our benefit system about what it encourages people to do, and I think it basically disencourages people to show what they can do rather than try to enable people to show what they could do. And I think fundamentally the structures of our benefit system are wrong, and it's a very binary test, both for personal independence payment and for what we call the work capability assessment around either you get additional financial support or you do not, and there's no additional support provided within those assessments about what someone might need and could need and how they could benefit from support.
So briefly, would a U-turn be a missed opportunity, though, to change things for the better?
I mean, I think the U-turn on freezing on PIP is I think, a good approach, because
okay.
I think it's too indiscriminatory.
OK. So, James, your charity was involved in this letter to the Chancellor laying out your fears of what could happen. So if the government is to abandon their plans, are you satisfied that the most vulnerable in society are protected?
Well, quite frankly, no. And I think the government hasn't set out anything yet. So we're still extremely concerned and just waiting to hear. And we have heard from thousands of disabled people who are anxiously waiting to hear too. We know that many disabled people who receive out-of-work benefits are some of our poorest. Trussell Trust Foundation research has found that many disabled people rely on food banks and are struggling to get by. And this is a group that we really need to protect.
So just quickly, if there is a U-turn, though, would you be satisfied?
No.
OK, there's still not enough protection?
No, there's not enough protection. There's further to go. PIP isn't working properly. Cuts from the welfare system are only going to take money from the poorest in this society.
Yeah. Angela, shouldn't we be focusing on helping people work, making people work, rather than punishing those who can't work?
Well, I think punishment is a very inflammatory and provocative word. I think we definitely need to break the cycle of welfare dependency and distinguish, at a time when the nation's finances are clearly straitened, those who really need help. Some of the sort of examples have been mentioned so far, who literally cannot work. They are so compromised by their disability that they cannot. That doesn't mean they don't have a work ethic. It's just that, unfortunately, that was the card that they were dealt. But equally, if we have a benefit system with a limited pot of cash, that means that the funds are diverted from those who need it, to those that are not incentivized to work because it's more profitable to stay at home, then we have a serious problem. And that's not about punishing anybody. It's not about having a punitive approach to those who are compromised in any way. And remember that there's a lot of difficulty about labelling who is fit for work. So if you look at the whole scope of mental health, for example, it's very difficult to identify those who are literally crippled by very serious situations like bipolar disorder and over-medicalising the challenges we face in life, sadness, bereavement, terrible disappointment. All these can make us feel awful, but actually work, it may not be a panacea, but it can certainly help in terms of fostering social connections, positivity, identity, and of course putting money in your pocket.
Yeah. OK, I mean, that's great. Let's move this on to mental illness. And Alia, I mean, I'm looking at some of the figures. According to a survey by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, nearly 1 in 10 people had to take time off work due to mental illness in the last year. The problem is getting worse. So 13 to 15% of working age population reported a long-term mental or behavioural health condition. In 2010, that was only 8 to 10%. Things are getting worse. Have we become less resilient? I mean, what's going on?
See, I think this idea of resilience and that people who are struggling are less resilient is really really unhelpful and quite disingenuous when you've got a population who have been struggling for years now with financial insecurity, unemployment issues that are not getting any better with, wage stagnation and rising inflation and issues that make it so much harder for people to get into work and actually function in work. And workplaces don't have, they don't make it easier for people with disabilities or ill health. In fact, it's much harder.
There'll be people at home who'll be screaming at the telly saying this didn't happen during the war. Is there something that's changing?
Well, I mean, if we look at the benefit system and we look at social security and the public sector, it's been broken down since the 80s, for example, that we then had this financial crisis. Then in 2010, the coalition government decided that austerity and I think cutting more public sector services, cutting more social security was going to help, when actually it's driven inequality to a huge inequality now. And even between 2010 and 2015, we saw that the 10% of poorest families were hit by, a 38% decrease in their income, whereas the richest 10% had a 5% decrease. And actually that only makes life much harder for people. And of course, mental health suffers.
OK, Angela, I mean, it's interesting that there is a growing issue in terms of mental illness and people taking time off work. But as Alia says, it's because of inequalities, it's because of lots of reasons that we can explain.
Well, I think it's a vast subject. If you look at it on a case-by-case basis, that's always helpful, but unfortunately the numbers are too large. What we do know is the number of people who are now claiming sickness benefits has rocketed. And it's interesting because if you talk to people who are self-employed, I'm not talking about people who are negotiating disabilities, but self-employed people, by and large, if you're running your own business, if it depends on you opening the shop or providing that service, they will crawl over hot coals to get into work, because if they don't work, then they don't earn. And it's interesting because a lot of people I've spoken to who are self-employed say they've never had a day off work, not because they haven't needed to or wanted to, but they've not had the support system behind them. And I think what's really important is, rather than chuck money at the problem to say, OK, you can't work, for what we're talking about, particularly mental health, let's support you going back to work for the reasons that I've said before, that actually, if you are feeling down that rabbit hole for all sorts of awful reasons, then maybe having connectivity at work, social engagement, having a purpose for getting out of bed. I know it sounds glib because when people are in a dark place, it's not that simple, but there are so many benefits in working. And I think we need to get that message across as well.
I was just going to say, but we're not chucking money at people who are struggling. That's simply not true. We're only making it much harder for them, and we have been making it much harder for them for years. And, the workplace is, particularly for working class people, we have a gig economy, we have stagnated wages, we have people with terrible working conditions, and we're saying, oh, go back to work when you're already finding life so difficult. Work is not somewhere that people are going to find joy, particularly when working conditions are so poor.
OK. Jean-André, so I want to talk about the word morality, which has been used quite a lot by the government. So Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, said last week there is a moral case here for making sure that people who can work are in work. Keir Starmer said the current system is morally indefensible, and lots of people have been unhappy with the way that word's being used, the fact that they're sort of saying they're on the right moral side. Does that seem right?
I think they're right. I think the system is currently created. It is indefensible morally. I think it drives the wrong behaviour. It disincentivises any engagement in society, and I think they are right about that. And I think it goes to a much broader point about the way we see disabled people in our society. We look at disabled people in a far too binary way. We look at them as either superheroes, and that's kind of seen during the 2012 Olympics, or as people that are incapable. And actually, we need a far more sophisticated way of viewing disabled people in our society.
Yeah, the system is morally indefensible.
But it can't be morally defensible to cut disabled people's benefits. I don't think it can be morality on both sides. It's, yes, the system isn't working, but it can't be the moral thing to then reduce the benefits of people, many who have been assessed not fit for any work at all, regardless of how much you take money away from them, it isn't going to find them a job.
Yeah, I mean, we'd say we're a compassionate society, wouldn't we? I mean, it would be hard to, it feels like punish the poorest people in society.
Again, I think in this room, we all agree that we should protect the most vulnerable. I think there's a major challenge with how the benefit system has changed, and indeed who's claiming these benefits over the last 10 years since the creation of PIP and even before that with the creation of employment support allowance. I think it's changed quite drastically over those years, and the benefit system hasn't kept up to pace with that.
Yeah, I mean, Alia, the health and disability-related benefits bill is currently, I think Angela touched on this before, £65 billion a year. It's projected to rise to £100 billion in the next 4 years. I mean, we've got to find that money somewhere. And lots of people might agree with you, but then they might say, well, where are we going to get the money from?
Well, I think you're right. You know, we live in a relatively compassionate society, and when people actually understand what's going on and they don't have sort of this rhetoric that, oh, we need to incentivise people who are struggling into work by taking away their benefits, you know, when we actually understand the financial situation and the fact that inequality is so large and that we have this huge pot of money that a small percentage of society have, and you know, people are compassionate. They don't want to see more homelessness. They don't want to see overspills in A&E. People who have the money are paying more taxes, and the people who are struggling to make ends meet, struggling in a cost of living situation, maybe get a bit more support where they need that support. You know,
I mean, time is against us, and I just want to find some solutions. Jean-André, where are we going to find the money if we want to keep things as they are?
I mean, I think we all agree that we need to do more to help disabled people into work. I think everyone around this table would do that. I think there is definitely an argument to put more money into employment support programs for disabled people, especially things like access to work, which I don't think is working as well as it should. But I do think that needs to, you know, more assertive support from the state to help disabled people needs to also come with a more active kind of assessment process where we put more requirements on people who are assessed for benefits.
Yeah. James, you were part of the letter to the Chancellor.
Yep.
What's the solution?
Well, the solution is to look at a different area of the economy and not try and punch down and take money away from our most vulnerable and disabled in society.
Angela, a way forward? I mean, do you agree with James there?
No, obviously we all want to help vulnerable people. We want to help those who want to get back into work, and shifting the finances around doesn't really help because ultimately there's only one pot. I think that there has to be an element of, almost sounds cruel to say earning it, but a kind of reciprocal approach to the money that you receive. If there is potential scope for work, and Bridget Kendall has touched on this by saying that people who want to try going back to work, their benefits won't be compromised and they will have a period in which they can have a go at going back to work, is a way of turning the philosophy around and is a way forward. Because I do strongly believe that once people get back into the workplace, if they can, I'm not talking about people that have the work ethic and literally physically can't, but if they can, they should have a go. It will be transformative.
And briefly, James, do you have any hope for the future? I mean, you wrote the letter because you're unhappy, but there's
we have
hope.
one of the least generous disability benefit system across the world. There are many countries that are far more generous, and I think it's really important when we read stories and we hear stories of disabled people living lives of luxuries on benefits. That is not the case. Many are turning to food banks now because benefits don't pay the bills, and at the same time many can't work. So we'd really want the Chancellor, and I think it is the Chancellor here, it's not DWP, to really think where this money can come from.
And that is where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you all very much indeed.